Please welcome Dr. Charles Jennison and his webinar entitled Snow Much Fun When You Prevent Wintertime Head Injuries.
Well, hi. Thanks so much for joining me. I see I still have my National Injury Prevention Day background on. That's every year. If you're not familiar with that, every year, November 18th is National Injury Prevention Day. So if you have an organization that can participate in that in some way, that would be great. It's the lead organization for that is the Injury Free Coalition for Kids, which is a lot of children's hospitals across the country are participants in that. So, well, I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at the University of Iowa, and I have no financial other conflicts of interest to disclose related to this presentation. Um, so let's just get into it. I'm going to first talk a little bit about snowmobiles. I I think I was asked by Courtney to kind of maybe do a presentation about preventing head injuries in the winter because I had done a study that she had seen related to snowmobiles. And so we'll talk a little bit about that study. We've got finally some snow on the ground in Iowa, and so a lot of people are grabbing their snowmobiles and taking the opportunity to go out and use them before it all melts again, which will happen here in just a few days, I believe. So, so let's talk a little bit about snowmobiles. So it's a very common recreational activity in northern climates. I grew up in Minnesota, so we had snowmobiles on the farm where I lived, and very popular in Minnesota and other northern states, and it's really quite common here in Iowa as well. There's over 1.3 million registered snowmobiles in the United States and over 600,000 registered snowmobiles in Canada. Here in Iowa, we have, as of 2022, we had 22,600 snowmobiles that were registered. So a number of years ago, I did a study looking at snowmobile injuries across the country. We utilized the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System database that's maintained by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And we in this NEISS, the surveillance system, they prospectively collect injury data from a stratified sampling of about 100 U.S. emergency departments across the United States. And by doing that, they're able to make national estimates of the number of injuries related to different products. And so we looked at that data from 2002 to 2017, and we found there was 2,642 snowmobile-related injuries in the database, which made a national estimate of about 160,000 ED visits from 2002 to 2017. 1/5 of them were less than 18 years of age. So the most common primary crash mechanism was rolling or flipping the vehicle, which was about a third. About a fifth of them, they fell off or were ejected from the snowmobile. And in about a third, almost a third of the cases, they struck a stationary object, which is really easy to do because you're traveling in woods a lot of times in other areas where just a little slight shift in the snow and the movement of the snowmobile, and all of a sudden you're hitting a tree or some other stationary object. So a post, for example. So here is a little video. He crosses this shallow little creek and he thinks he's going to avoid that tree, but he ends up sliding right into it. So these can happen so quickly and so easily with a snowmobile. So we looked at mechanism of injury by age group for kids. We looked at kids that were 0 to 13 versus those that were 14 to 17. And that younger age group had a higher proportion that had a collision with an object, 42% versus 27%. And they also had higher proportions of falling off or being ejected from the snowmobile, 30% versus 19% in the older age group. The older youth had higher percentages of rollovers and of motor vehicle collisions as compared to those younger. Here I'll show just a short video where when you're, especially a lot of times you're traveling with another, if you're doing recreation riding, you're traveling with another snowmobiler, and if they make an unexpected move or something, then all of a sudden you're colliding with them. So the other snowmobile just veered off to the left. The other snowmobile traveling behind them didn't expect that, and they end up crashing right into them. If we look at youth versus adults, youth had greater percentages of rollovers compared to adults. Um, Youth also were different with adults with regards to their body part injured, with a higher percentage of injuries to the head, neck, and face, 20% versus 3%, compared to adults. And they had fewer injuries to the torso as compared to adults. So the majority of fatalities with snowmobiles are associated with uh, injuries to the head, neck, or facial area. So helmets are extremely important to really decrease fatalities related to snowmobiles. Those wearing a helmet had a 63% reduced odds of requiring inpatient admission compared to those without in a study that we did. So really important to wear helmets. Of riders who were admitted to the ICU, those who wore a helmet had lower injury severity scores, lower head injury scores compared to the unhelmeted riders. But despite this, benefits of helmets in reducing injuries and fatalities, they often are underutilized. So we did this study where we wanted to look at rural Iowa adolescents' frequency of helmet use with a variety of different modes of transportation, including bicycles, horses, ATVs, dirt bikes, motorcycles, and snowmobiles. And to do that, and also we wanted to evaluate their attitudes regarding the importance of wearing helmets on these modes of transportation and importance of laws and so forth. So, and also we want to identify demographic factors associated with the use or lack of use of helmets. So we surveyed a convenient sample of attendees of the 2022 Iowa FFA Leadership Conference that's held every year in Ames, Iowa. And we did so at our University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital Injury Prevention booth. FFA, as probably a lot of you are aware of, was formerly called Future Farmers of America, but now they go just by the moniker FFA. But it's an intracurricular high school organization for students interested in agriculture and leadership. There's more than 15,000 members in Iowa across 260 chapters across the state. The survey was anonymous and explored the attitudes and use of helmets. We did descriptive and comparative analyses, including multivariable logistic regression analyses on the data. So over 1,300 FFA members completed the survey. Of them, males would be up 41%, females 58%. If you look at FFA members, there's actually slightly more females than males in FFA, but not as much a discrepancy as that. So we did have a little oversampling of females versus males at the conference. Ages range from 13 to 18 years of age. A little over half of them were 16 to 18 years. 50%, half of them lived on a farm. About a fifth of them lived in the country, but not on a farm. And almost 30% lived in a town. Now, a lot of these are mostly rural towns, but they lived in town. And almost all of them were non-Hispanic white. So at first I didn't know what we'd expect to see for snowmobile ownership. I thought, gosh, we have less and less snow. It seems like every year you can't have too many people owning snowmobiles, but just over a quarter of the youth participants in this study, their households owned a snowmobile. That was a little bit higher than I thought we'd see. Those that lived on farms had higher proportion than those that lived in the country, not on a farm or in town. So almost a third of those that lived on a farm, they had at least one snowmobile. And over a third of them, 35% had ridden a snowmobile in the past year. So as far as looking at some crosstab analyses, males had higher proportions of having ridden a snowmobile in the past year compared to females. Those that lived on farms, higher proportions than those that lived elsewhere. Those that were non-Hispanic white had higher proportions than those of other races. And not surprisingly, those that owned a snowmobile had much higher proportions of having ridden a snowmobile in the past year compared to those individuals whose families did not own a snowmobile. In fact, after doing logistic regression analyses and controlling for the other variables, the only one that was really significant was that if you own a snowmobile, you're over 50 times more likely to have ridden a snowmobile in the past year compared to those who didn't own a snowmobile. Looking at frequency of riding snowmobiles, those that did, most of them, 2/3 of them had only ridden a snowmobile for a few times during that past year. Only 19% were, whenever they had snow, they were doing it daily practically. Older um, participants, FFA members were more like had higher proportions riding at least weekly, and those that owned snowmobiles had higher proportions also riding at least weekly. And if you owned a snowmobile, you're about 11 times more likely to ride at least weekly compared to those that didn't own a snowmobile. So we asked them whether they thought there should be a snowmobile helmet law here in Iowa. Almost 3/5, 59%, believe that there should be a law requiring the use of a helmet when riding snowmobiles. Um, so we asked that, of course, of these other modes of transportation as well. And slightly higher proportion, 72% said there should be a law for motorcycles in Iowa. But you can see 59% for snowmobiles. That was higher than that thought there should be a law for dirt bikes, but much higher than those that thought there should be a laws for ATVs. So there's a different kind of mentality related to the importance of helmet use with snowmobiles as compared to ATVs, even though we know that the injuries that are related to the ATVs are at least as great, if not greater, than that of the severity of injuries we see with snowmobiles. Females had higher proportions. That's who thought there should be a snowmobile helmet law compared to males, and those that owned a snowmobile had higher proportions than those that didn't own a snowmobile. So 65% of them. So this was completely opposite for the other modes of transportation that we looked at. Those that had motorcycles, dirt bikes, ATVs, all were less likely to say there should be a helmet law for those vehicles than those that didn't own them. But that wasn't the case for snowmobiles. So again, very different kind of attitudes and kind of safety attitudes about helmet use in motorcycle with snowmobiles versus other kind of modes of transportation. So over half, 53%, reported they always wore a helmet when riding a snowmobile. That was the highest proportion compared to all these other kind of things we tested. And another 14% said they mostly wore them. Only 15% said they never wore a helmet when riding a snowmobile. Well, here's a comparison of snowmobiles versus always or most of the time wearing a helmet compared to these other modes. Only 21% said they did that with ATVs. 51 and 58% with dirt bikes and motorcycles said they always or mostly wore a helmet, and nearly 70% said they always or mostly wore a helmet when riding a snowmobile. And you can see the opposite with never. Half of the ATV riders said they never wore a helmet, while only 15% of those with snowmobiles never wore a helmet. So again, very different kind of safety culture related to helmets and snowmobiles compared to other modes of transportation. Again, females had higher proportions, said they always or mostly wore a helmet. Those that owned a snowmobile had higher proportions, said they always or mostly wore a helmet compared to that didn't own one. Again, different from other modes of transportation where that was always the opposite. Those that rode less frequently actually wore a helmet more when riding dirt bikes and ATVs and motorcycles. And daily weekly riders were also had higher proportions that said they always or mostly wore a helmet. And if you're doing logistic regression analysis, those that owned a snowmobile were 3 times more likely to always or mostly wear a helmet compared to those that didn't own one. As far as the importance of wearing a snowmobile helmet, so here are the averages and median scores for that. Again, you can see the same kind of relationship. ATVs had the lowest median helmet importance, 10 being very, very important and 0 being not important at all. And snowmobiles are very similar to that importance related to dirt bikes and motorcycles. Females, those that owned a snowmobile, both had higher ascribed higher importance of wearing a snowmobile helmet than males and those that didn't own a snowmobile. You can see that those that always wore a helmet had, again, ascribed more importance to it, and those that sported helmet law also had ascribed more importance of wearing a snowmobile helmet. So there are helmets designed specifically for snowmobiles. They provide much better safety and performance than other styles of helmets when snowmobiling. But more importantly, they're built to handle cold weather and extreme conditions and will keep the head warmer than motorcycle helmets. So this is probably a big factor in why people wear helmets when snowmobiling is that not only do they protect them, but they can stay warm when they're wearing these snowmobile helmets. And they also come in with built-in features designed to help one withstand snow, wind, cold, ice, and other winter conditions. This includes ventilation and insulation that motorcycles just don't have. So that probably has a big factor, but it's good that we're seeing people that have this kind of safety culture surrounding snowmobiles, even though we don't see that as well with ATVs. It's recommended that if you have an open face model that you also wear goggles, protect your face from snow and cold. So our conclusions of our this study was that study adolescents rated wearing a helmet while snowmobiling very important. A majority supported laws mandating use on snowmobiles. Almost half reported not always wearing a helmet. So there's some room for improvement in getting young people here in Iowa wearing snowmobile helmets. Our study identified demographics for which interventions regarding helmet use could be targeted, especially those that were less frequent users. And more rural adolescents always wearing a helmet while riding snowmobiles would likely decrease the number of deaths and serious injuries associated with these vehicles. So hopefully we can keep increasing that proportion. At least there's a fairly good safety culture related to wearing them, and a lot of people who ride them frequently wear their helmet. Well, I thought I'd just end with one more video here that I found on the internet. This is a race, a snowmobile race, and the person took a bad spill, but it looks like they're okay. But like always, you should always pay attention around the environment of what's happening. Um, as people who might, respond to emergencies and so forth, that's the most important thing is always to keep oneself safe and prevent further injuries from occurring. So let's talk about sledding. We just had the snow. A lot of people are probably going to kids are going to go down sledding down hillsides right now since we have some snow. Here's a patient I saw. This actually isn't a picture of the patient, but just a representative one I found on the internet. Could have been him. He was sledding down a hill while lying prone. He had no helmet on, and he hit a tree with his head. He had possible brief loss of consciousness, he had bruising on his face, and then on CT scan of his head, he had several punctate cerebral hemorrhages in the frontoparietal area and had definitely suffered concussion type problems as well. So this is a child I saw here at the University of Iowa, but not an uncommon story. Through the years, I've seen plenty of kids with head injuries related to sledding. One of the problems is that you can reach pretty good speeds sledding, up to maybe 20 miles per hour or so. Approximately 15% of ED-treated injuries from sledding are head injuries. 43% of those are brain injuries. So things that we definitely want to prevent. One thing I guess I will say is that I have a lot of pictures in this presentation. Not all of them represent safe kind of activities. So take every picture with a grain of salt that I'm not saying what that's showing is safe necessarily. So for sledding, there's really no standards for sledding helmets, and not very many helmets that are specifically produced for sledding. But most commonly, helmets that are recommended for using for sledding, including bicycle helmets, hockey helmets, snow and ski helmets, skateboarding, and speed skating helmets. So all of those would be reasonable options to use when sledding to help decrease the likelihood of a head injury. However, there's been very few studies that really have looked at helmet use in sledding, but there was one that found bicycle helmets may perform better than hockey helmets at higher speed impacts. It was kind of surprising to the authors of the study, but also interesting to me that bicycle helmets might be a very reasonable helmet to use when sledding. The problem is, of course, is that they have ports in it. They're not really made for winter time and keeping one warm. So if it's not a warm day, it could be kind of tough using a bicycle helmet. Certainly having a stocking hat underneath the bicycle helmet may not allow it really to fit well and really to protect the head adequately. Um, Better probably than no helmet, but still probably not the best at having a stocking hat under a bicycle helmet for sledding. It's believed that the effectiveness of helmets wearing uh, for sledding would be similar to that of children riding bicycles, which is about 85% effective in preventing head injuries. Um, uh, Good to have a face guard as well, but if you don't have a face guard, you're probably wearing some goggles, not googles. uh, Goggles would be a good thing to do. So other injuries that you can get from sledding, including abrasions, contusions, lacerations, sprains, chipped teeth, and fractures, those are probably the majority of injuries. Abdominal trauma can also occur. That can happen from a forceful fall or bump into a hard ground or hitting a tree or other immobile object. Um, some of the things that can help decrease the likelihood of having an injury is supervision. um, Constant adult supervision. A 4-year study that was done by the American Association of Osteopathic Surgeons in coordination with the U.S. Forest Service found that 71% of unsupervised sledding outings ended in injuries. That seemed pretty high but 71% of them, it all stops once somebody gets hurt, I guess. But when adults were present, that dropped to 29%. So still, a lot of injuries occur from sledding. Fortunately, most of them are minor, but about 2.5% required hospitalization. So the most common mechanism of injury is a collision with an obstruction. So it's really important to find a safe sport to go sledding. So you want to really look at the site look for holes, roots, tree stumps, fences that might be covered by the snow. Certainly want to avoid areas with trees. Now, it used to be when you had a medical kind of conference, you would always have cartoons, especially from the far side. Seems like people have gotten away from that. They never use any cartoons anymore. But I cut this cartoon out like 25 years ago, and this is the first presentation I've been able to use it. So you're stuck with it. It goes Calvin and Hobbes. There's a tree. Hit the brakes. Trees are my brakes, Calvin says, and unfortunately, that's often the true when kids are sledding. The trees are what stop them, and a lot of times that can cause some very serious injuries. Certainly want to avoid slopes that are near a street, road, or parking lot, or a pond. I've certainly seen where people are going on a hill where they go over through a ditch and over the road and down the ditch again. Very difficult for cars sometimes to stop or expect somebody, to fly across on a sled across a road, or to stop on icy road conditions. You want to avoid ponds because it's really hard to know if that's going to be strong enough for ice on that for prevent somebody going through. So you don't really want to be sledding near those kind of places. One at a time, only one child down the hill at a time. Often we'll see kids who are multiple kids going down hills at a time and then hitting each other and getting even head injuries from that. When children are finished going down the hill, they should be able to tell them to move out of the way quickly, to allow for someone else to go, and do not allow the next slider to begin until the previous one is safely off the hill, or away from the sliding area. Sledders should be sitting and facing forward. We know that a prone position really does increase the risk and predisposes the rider to serious head, facial, upper extremity, and abdominal injuries. And usually the severe head injuries occur due to blunt trauma. So one of the things that I've seen over the years, especially when I was working in Des Moines at Blank Children's Hospital Emergency Department, it would be amazing. I could almost predict when we were going to have lots of sledding injuries. And particularly when the ice had kind of melted, snow had kind of melted a little bit, and now it had gotten really icy, and it was just an unbelievable slick. I knew that we were going to see a bunch of sledding injuries, because on that icy snow, you can get just such greater speeds on it, and it's more difficult to control one's where one traverses. And so it's very easy to get off track and hit other stationary objects like trees and when there's icy conditions. And also because of that increased speed, you also have um, more severe injuries a lot of times and kids hitting their heads. And so I always thought when I should, every time I saw the conditions of the icy kind of snow, saying having radio stations and TV stations having, sledding alerts, because of the increased danger of sledding in those kind of conditions. So other recommendations, including wearing extra layers for warmth, and don't allow anyone to stay outside if their clothing becomes wet. Worry about increased likelihood of frostbite, and bright colors can make them children easier to spot when they're sledding. Heavy-duty gloves and boots, and to not use any sled substitutes, especially ones that could be dangerous in themselves, including car hoods, which I remember one patient I saw with a very serious abdominal and head injuries who had been on a car hood and was being towed by an ATV. So certainly you don't want to be on those type of things to be sledding. Which brings me to my next case, which is a 12-year-old boy who was on a sled being pulled by an ATV traveling about 15 miles per hour when the rope broke and he hit a tree. He had loss of consciousness for about 60 to 90 seconds. He was taken to the local emergency department, but there was no CT available, so he was transferred to the University of Iowa. The patient had headache and was confused. He had lots of facial swelling, abrasions, and bruising, including over his forehead, bilateral periorbital areas. His nose and his lips were also very swollen and bruised. He had dried blood in his nares bilaterally, showing that he had had a nice bloody nose. He had this huge ear laceration on the right, extended from his tragus, which is that little bump in front of the ear, and then up around the auricle and all the way onto the back side. He had some right shoulder pain, especially with movement, and there was an obvious deformity of the right wrist with pain. So he had a head CT done. He had no intracranial abnormalities, but he had a large frontal subgaleal hematoma. Obviously, he was having concussion symptoms and had a significant concussion and was still having symptoms. He had a maxillofacial CT. You can see on the top view, he had fractures of his nose bilaterally, some blood in the nasal passages. He also had on the lower CT here, you can see that he has blood here in his right frontal sinus. This is black part is air, but this here is blood here on the right side. He had a normal cervical spine CT. His x-rays, though, did show a displaced radial fracture. I don't know, I'm hoping you can see my pointer, but here on the right view, you can see that the distal portion of the radius is displaced posteriorly. This is called a Colles fracture. This part right here should be sitting right here. So he was admitted to the hospital for observation because of his ongoing kind of head injury symptoms. Unfortunately, eventually had to have his wrist pinned due to instability of that fracture. So it's probably goes without saying that pulling a sled with a motorized vehicle is extremely dangerous and really should never be attempted or done. So I would want to definitely not recommend that. Well, we can talk a little bit about hockey. I particularly wanted to talk a little bit about this Canadian study. I think it actually came out maybe in 2011, but it was a big study that looked at 13,000 injured children aged 5 to 19 between 1990 and 2009 using data from the Canadian Hospital's Injury Reporting and Prevention Program. And it tracked visits to emergency departments at 11 pediatric hospitals and 3 general hospitals across Canada. And they found that about just over 80% of the children and teen with brain injuries were male, and the average age was 13. Hockey accounted for 44.3% of all the traumatic brain injuries in Canadian children and teens taking part in team sports. Now we know, hockey is pretty popular in Canada, but here, even in the United States, um, hockey accounts for more concussions for team sports than they probably should, given the number of young people participating in hockey. So in this Canadian study, they found that many young hockey players were getting hurt because of being checked from behind by an opponent into another player or into the boards. A move that was basically banned in basically all youth leagues for more than 20 years before the study. In fact, this type of mechanism accounted for about 10% of all the Canadian kids with brain injuries. So their authors stated that hockey leagues needed to make penalties for such infractions harsher and more strictly enforced as a means of preventing brain trauma in young players. In fact, about 90% of all professional hockey players have had at least one concussion. So this is a big problem in hockey. Uh, so I thought I'd talk just, I don't want to talk a lot about concussions, but I just want to talk a little bit about it. So the Sixth International Consensus Conference on Concussion in Sports occurred in 2022 in Amsterdam. And this, because from this conference, there was a consensus paper that was published related to pediatric sport-related concussions. And some of the things in that paper that they felt were prevention strategies that showed significant evidence for was policies disallowing body checking in ice hockey, which we basically just already talked about, but that was something that were definitely is an important thing to do. Another prevention strategies that they found significant evidence for was neuromuscular training, such as specific exercises focused on strength, balance, and agility, including neck strengthening. And also, mouth guard use has been shown to decrease pediatric sports-related concussions. So not only can protect the teeth, but can help absorb that kind of some of that forces that are transported to the head during sport activities. And of course, it's important for this to be effective, they can't be wearing their mouth guards like the the picture on the left. And you see that all the time, seeing people with their holding their mouth guard like that. So it needs to be worn correctly and properly fitted to protect their teeth and gums, but also to help protect concussions. So what are some things that they found that facilitated concussion recovery? A couple things included reduced screen time. So really, as soon as someone has a concussion, they should not be on TV, should not be on their phones and so forth. That should be something that should be instituted right away. Um, and early return to light physical activity. So yeah, for the first day or so, maybe not too much for any activity, but as soon as 48 hours, really can want to start returning to light physical activity below the level that increases their symptoms. Sometimes this has been referred to as sub-symptom threshold training, but you don't want people just doing nothing. And that we know might be a problems for kind of allowing concussion symptoms to persist. We used to say, a couple decades ago, I remember, saying basically almost all concussions recover in 7 to 10 days, but that's not really true. About half of them maybe recover in that time period. About 30% of pediatric concussions can take 1 month or longer. So some of these kids need to be watched closely and cannot return back to sporting activities until they kind of recover. So risk factors for prolonged recovery include high initial symptom burden, if they continue to play after the concussion. So really important, if somebody has a head injury and it's uncertain whether they had a concussion or not, you need to get them out of the game, evaluate them closely. If there's any question at all, don't have them go back and return to play. Those that had delayed medical care, if there was little reduction in physical or cognitive activity after the concussion, but also if there was prolonged cognitive rest, so if they, so you don't necessarily want to be resting too long in cognition. And then female patients with migraines, those are all risk factors for prolonged recovery after a concussion. And I'll just say, most everybody probably here knows what concussion symptoms are, but they include headaches, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, confusion, difficulty concentrating or remembering, slowed thinking, word finding difficulties, irritability, mood swings, sleep disturbances. All these are concussion symptoms. So ice skating, again, uh, there's really no standards for helmets for ice skating, just like for sledding. But typically, people recommend similar helmets: bicycling, hockey, snow ski helmets, skateboarding, speed skating helmets. There are some helmets that are marketed for ice skating. Wearvo has a line of helmets that they sell. They're certified to the hockey standard, but they're marketed to figure skaters as having an improved aesthetic. They also have ports for pigtails and ponytails. They know that a lot of girls are figure skating, so here you can see the ports on the side for the pigtails, and here the one in the back for ponytail. But which is smart, because if they have their hair that way, a helmet's not going to fit very well with their hairstyle in that way. So having the ability to keep it in that hairstyle and still protect the head is a good thing. Skiing and snowboarding. Um, so skiers versus snowboarders, who has more injuries? Well, a Rochester Institute of Technology study that was done under the auspices of the American National Ski Association examined over 30 years of injury and fatality data. I'm going over this study, even though I think it was published in like 2011, 2012, because it was a really big study. They found that snowboarders were between 50 to 70% more likely to sustain injuries than skiers, but they were also about 1/3 less likely to be killed on the slopes than those skiing. So that's kind of interesting, but we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. They found that those that had fatalities were generally people in the late teens to late 40s and male. They were better than average skiers who typically had a high-speed impact with a tree on the margins of groomed trails. So that's kind of the typical fatality with skiing. So what is it about uh, snowboarders? Why do they have less fatalities than skiers? Well, one of the authors suggested that when a snowboarder falls, the board might act kind of like a sea anchor. So they're slowing before they get to the tree or rock or other fixed objects a little more. While skiers may tend to slide further when they fall. So that might be a potential reason. Authors also attributed the skiers' lower injury count to the better to better maintain equipment, better standards for equipment, and the use of helmets. So they said that for broken legs, for example, they were really common in the 70s and 80s, but now can be nearly non-existent if skiers' binding is appropriately set and adjusted. So it's really seen a lot decrease in those kind of injuries with skiers. Um, the author said skiing is often about racing, even if it's just to see who was the first back home. So that speed kind of element might contribute to more serious injuries to the head. While snowboarders are more focused on maneuvers, so jumps and tricks, which are done at a slower pace, though naturally it's easier to get hurt doing them. So probably explains a little bit more why snowboarders have more injuries than skiers. So head injuries occur in up to 47%, I'm sorry, 47% of skiing or snowboarding injuries, and it's a predominant cause of death. But for a good thing, in the study that was done with, again, 2011, there was about a 50% decline in head injuries since 1999. And they attributed that to the increase in helmets being worn on ski slopes. So concussions are the most prevalent head injury in skiing and snowboarding. Um, This was a study that was done in 2020. At the bottom, you can see that citation. They found that a high prevalence of low energy injuries in contrast to high energy injuries um, in skiing, suggesting a need for better low energy protection. So they felt that both low and high velocity testing, as well as oblique tests, are really necessary to best evaluate head protection and helmets. So, um, so kind of this low velocity kind of injuries are really important to be able to protect with helmets. So relative to the mechanism of injury, falls are the leading cause of concussions, losing balance, misjudging a turn, or coming upon an unexpected obstacle can all lead to falls for skiers of any skill level. Collision with other skiers or stationary objects, such as trees or objects, are also common causes of of injury. And skiing in crowded areas or at high speeds increase the risk. And this really can happen to skiers of all skill levels. So no matter the level of the skier, they really need and can benefit from wearing a ski helmet. These should, of course, meet safety standards. You want to ensure it fits snugly and covers the entire head, including the back and sides of the head. And you want to replace your ski helmet if it's been damaged or involved in a significant impact, or if there's broken chin straps or missing foam or padding inside the helmet. And for youth skiers, they really need to replace the helmet if you need to replace the helmet if they've grown enough that they no longer fit their helmet since the last time you went skiing. All right, so falls are always a big problem related to head injuries, and that's true in the wintertime as well. Kids fall, especially toddlers fall a lot. Um, you might say, well, all these pictures of kids that look like they've been falling in the summertime. What about the wintertime? Well, wintertime falls do occur, but instead of occurring outside, they have really occur inside. So let's talk about this case. So this is a 20-month-old girl. It was Christmas time at the paternal grandparents. The father was concerned about her safety because when he came into the house, he saw this. What unbelievable, dangerous thing did he see? He saw this, a coffee table. So this is a picture of me and my daughter about 23 years ago now. And I remember this vividly. I came into the house, I saw the coffee table in front of the couch. It was crowded with knickknacks and vases and all kinds of junk. And I thought, we really should get rid of this coffee table. The kids might fall into that and get a head injury or a laceration. I've seen so many kids in my career who have been injured, especially lacerations, because of coffee tables. End tables and raised hearths as well, fireplace hearths, but coffee tables are the big one. So I saw this, I just thought, oh, and then I said, it's got so much stuff on it. What are the chances of the kids getting hurt in the next 2 days um, because of this coffee table? Well, we were getting ready to go home, and my daughter, pictured there, fell into the coffee table, had a laceration that we had to go to the emergency department to be sewn. And I thought, why did I not just remove that coffee table? So that's a big thing I tell young uh, parents with young children is, remove your coffee table. If you want to, if you have to have something in front of the couch, place it with an ottoman. You can put a tray on it if you need to have, serve tea or coffee or whatever on it, but get a coffee table. Very likely you'll save your child from having a laceration. And a lot of these, some of them will even have it where the flip comes up, the top comes off, and you can store toys or whatever in the center of it. So uh, replace those coffee tables with ottomans. And if people can't do that or don't want to do that, they can also put foam padding over the edges of it. That can help. Raised fireplace hearths, putting foam padding over theirs, over those edges can sometimes help. and kind of help decrease these head injuries to the young toddlers and especially lacerations. Well, stair gates are also important. Again, kids are in the house, and so they're going to be potentially having falls down the stairs. So parents should use bolted safety gates instead of pressure-mounted ones, especially at tops of stairs. This is a picture of a kid who fell down the stairs because there was no gates, and so that's really important with young toddlers um, to have gates. And also securing other furniture and TVs. This is a big problem. Kids will pull out the drawers and use them as stairs. That causes the dressers a lot of times to tip over, a lot of times on top of them. This was a picture that was captured from the security camera in the room where the kids were. And TVs have been also known to flip over, so securing those to the walls is really important so they don't fall and injure children. And last of all, I wanted to just mention about motor vehicle crashes because despite all the winter sports and things going on, if you're talking about a serious injury to a child during the winter, um, one of the main causes is going to be a motor vehicle crash. With winter, icy snow conditions, crashes are maybe but very likely to occur, and children unrestrained especially can get serious head injuries. So this is a 6-month-old male. He was being held by his 8-year-old brother in the middle of the back seat of the minivan. Both those children were unrestrained. The others in the vehicle were restrained. It was kind of a full minivan. And they collided with a pickup truck and rolled over. No one else was seriously injured except this 6-month-old male. He was ejected from the vehicle, found limp with agonal breathing. Intraosseous needle was put in his lower bone, the bone in his lower leg. An oral airway was placed and a breathing support with a bag valve mask was started. He was intubated at the hospital. He had corneal reflexes. His corneal reflexes were absent bilaterally of his eye. His pupils were minimally reactive to light. CT showed extensive skull fractures, subdural and subarachnoid hemorrhages, lacerations of the right parietal and temporal lobes, cerebral hemorrhages, and brain swelling. The child survived only a few hours from and died from his head injury. So everybody knows the importance of having children restrained properly. I would refer you to the American Academy of Pediatrics site for guidelines related to child passenger safety, but I'll just kind of go over a couple things briefly. Infants should ride in the rear face seat as long as possible. You want to switch to a rear-facing convertible seat when the infant outgrows their rear-facing only seat. Most convertible seats have limits that permit a child to ride rear-facing to 2 years of age or more. So the longer they can stay rear-facing, the better they're going to be in a crash. And if they can be in the middle of the back seat, even better than on the side. Any child who has outgrown the rear-facing weight or height limit for his convertible seat should use a forward-facing seat with a harness as long as possible, at least 4 years of age, but really even longer than that is best. If your child outgrows a seat before reaching 4 years of age, consider using a seat with a harness approved for higher weights and helmets. Much better way for them to be restrained in the car than a seat belt. And all children whose weight or height exceeds the forward-facing limit for their car seat should use a belt positioning booster seat until the vehicle seat belt fits properly. Typically, this is when they're about 4 feet 9, 4 feet 10 inches, and they're between 8 and 12 years of age, typically around 10 years. Most children will not fit most vehicle seat belts without a booster seat until about 10, 11 years of age. And it's really important because this really helps the positioning of the lap portion of the belt to be over their hips. Kids wearing seatbelts, a lot of times it's above their pelvis, and they're more likely to get significant intra-abdominal injuries, even spine injuries, which I have seen. So much better to get that pelvis up in the air a little bit so that lap goes across their upper lap and over their pelvis. And all children younger than 13 should ride in the back seat. Car seats in winter, I call the puffy coat syndrome. So you have this puffy down jacket on, coat on, and your seatbelt and car seats don't fit as tightly. And so it's going to be a little more likely that they're not going to keep you restrained as properly as if you have no coat on. So I keep thinking about that and make certain that it's across the lap properly for adults. But for younger children, it's even maybe even a big problem as well. So these bulky winter coats can cause a loose fit for the harnesses and increases the chances of inadequate restraint if they're in a crash. So you really want to have a kind of a lightweight fleece jacket, something like that. Um, and then once you have them positioned in the car seat, cover them with a blanket or a coat on backwards in order to keep them adequately warm. Make sure your child's face is uncovered. If you can warm up the car, of course, before putting the child in, that's a good thing. And so you don't have this kind of puffy coat syndrome problem. And here you can see a little bit older kids. Again, on the left, you get a kind of bulky coat where that might compromise how tight the harness is fitting. So that's all I wanted to cover today. Did anybody have any questions that I might be able to cover? I
We
haven't had a chance
had,
to look at the chat here. Oh, there's some things.
yeah, we had one question, and it is, what is the difference between a head injury and a brain injury?
Yes, so sometimes people can have an injury to their head, like um, hematomas or lacerations and things like that. Might still be a head injury. Um, it just depends a little bit on how people are defining it. But so yeah, so I would say a brain injury is when you have concussion, um, bleeding around the brain, bruising of the brain. So those are more kind of brain injuries, where a head injury might include other things.
Okay. And I don't see any other questions in the chat so far.
Oh yeah, loss LOC. I'm sorry, that's loss of consciousness. Yes, that's true. Thank you for answering that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennison.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, there's something that was new or reaffirmed some of the things as far as preventing these wintertime head injuries. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye now.